All right, welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing chapter 5 on elasticity. Elasticity is a pretty basic concept in economics and in politics and especially in statistics. Really, it's more of a modeling concept than anything. So we're going to discuss this a little bit, and this will be the last chapter that both of the courses share. So starting at chapter 6, the textbook will diverge, and macroeconomics and microeconomics will have their own individual sort of chapters, and I'll have individual lectures for each. My YouTube page is open, so if you just happen to want to watch the macro and you're in micro, feel free, but you don't need to, and I won't be posting them on your Canvas. So, but from here on out, it will diverge, and we'll have separate content. But we had to get through some necessary basics in the first 5 chapters, especially since they don't really require you to do one or the other first. So I didn't necessarily know if everyone has their basics in economic parlance, I guess. So we'll split out from here. All right, so elasticity. Elasticity is just the idea that there's a relationship between things, percent relationships. This is also the idea that graphically things don't have to be a straight line, right? A change in the x-axis can have a different effect on the y-axis here than it does over here. So you can get asymptotic curves. You get curves in general. The straight line is not very likely in the economic or political realm, right? Human beings don't really act like atoms do. We're not so easily put into a box of behavioral likelihoods, right? That we have likelihoods, and those likelihoods change over time. So that's what we'll be discussing. Elasticity measures responsiveness of one variable to changes in another variable. This is part of my dissertation is on how trust in government affects the likelihood of protest and riot amongst minority groups, which strangely enough is going to be a pretty hot topic soon. So I'm glad to be finishing it up when I am. But I find that at the bottom level of income, the minority group, whether they trust the government or not, doesn't really affect their likelihood of protest. But if you're at the top end of the income group, if you actually have resources as a minority group, you're much more likely to riot or protest or civil war, etc., when you don't trust the government, right? So the effect is very different. It's elastic. There's very little effect at the low end of the income curve for a minority group. There's a high effect at the high end of the income curve if you split it out into sort of 3 blocks, basically. So you see the effect rising dramatically toward the richer end of the spectrum. And that's elasticity. I'm not going to read all these definitions to you. You're probably going to have to spend just a little bit of time trying to remember what these things mean. Elasticity of supply, elasticity of demand. Once you have the concept of elasticity, though, you should have all of this. I would also say that I might add a problem or two based on this graph block. I guess it doesn't really have a number or anything, but if you look below here, right above section 5.2, you get the percent change in quantity and the percent change in price. Don't memorize this. I will provide this on the exam, but we might have a problem or two based on this, just so that I know that you understand how elasticity is calculated mathematically. It's really pretty easy, though. It's just the price change in the quantity over the change in the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price times 100, and you'll get a unit like if you look at section 5.3 graph or table 5.2, you have this elasticity and pricing chart. So anything under a 1 is highly inelastic, and anything over a 1 is elastic. And we'll talk a little bit about that, okay? So before we move on to section 5.3, I should hold on and we'll talk about 5.2. These are just basically theoretical concepts. There's really no such thing as infinite elasticity or infinite inelasticity. You're always going to get some deviance, right? You're always going to get a change. It's very unlikely that you'll ever get these, but I guess they just had to point them out. But we really won't stick with that. You should know section 5.3. You should know this table 5.2. Just understand what it's saying, right? So it's saying that if you reduce the, if you increase the price of housing, right, by 10%, then you will increase the supply of housing by, it says 12%. 1.2%. Man, that was really bad. Okay, let's do that again. Table 5.2. If we're looking at housing, if you increase housing price, if you increase housing price by 10%, this 0.12 elasticity suggests that you will have a 1.2% increase in the housing supply. Okay, and for, let's say, premium cable TV down at the bottom, if you increase the price of premium cable TV, you'll reduce the supply by 17.7%. If you and on the flip side, if you reduce price by 10% on cable TV, you will increase the supply by 17.7%. So anything above a 1 is elastic. Anything below a 1 is inelastic. And anything that is inelastic, it's something that you just have to have generally. It is a human need or a societal need. So the things on here are pretty obvious, right? It's how do I get around? It's electricity. It's food and housing. It's all of these things. So regardless of how much you change the price, it's not going to have much effect on the supply because people just have to have it, right? But people don't have to have cable TV or restaurant meals, right? The things above a 1 are the things that people are foregoing at this very moment, right? People are canceling their cable and trying to find cheaper options like Netflix. We're seeing, we're seeing alcohol sales increase. So I guess you could argue that that's inelastic. But restaurant meals, people are starting to cut back a little bit. So just know, again, that anything above a 1 is elastic and below a 1 is inelastic. Okay. Does raising prices lead to greater revenue? It just depends. It depends on whether the demand is elastic or not. And so this chart that I provided, table 5.3 from the book, I also put in lay terms beneath it. I find that sometimes it's hard to quite understand the standardized language they use. So if you have elastic demand, if price is elastic, raising the prices will be offset by the loss in demand, and this will lead to a loss in revenue. So all of those things like that we were talking about earlier with a high elasticity above a 1, those things, if you raise the prices on them, you're going to lose revenue, right? In lay terms. Anything with inelastic demand, those things that are sort of necessities like housing, electricity, and food, if you raise the prices in them, it won't really affect demand that much, and so the company will increase their revenue. You may get a pushback, though, not from an economic standpoint, but from a sort of political and social standpoint. The company has to worry about getting some pushback. But from a purely economic standpoint, if you just keep raising prices on food, you will just keep increasing your profit. This is one of the reasons for what we talked about earlier in the last chapter, price caps and things like that, so that you don't get extortion and things of that sort. Okay, can costs be passed on to consumers? This is sort of what we were talking about earlier. And if you look at figure 5.8 and you look at A, that is when elasticity exists in the market, right? And so if you raise the price slightly, then your supply is going to increase, and this will help out consumers. On the B market, if you move from equilibrium point 0 to equilibrium point 1, and you have a low elasticity of demand, you're able to pass on those costs to your consumers. So down here in lay terms, I tried to lay it out for you as well. If you look at under in lay terms number 1, where you have inelastic demand, it says a change in supply leads to basically the same demand for the product, right? And this is what we were talking about with like housing, electricity, food. Regardless of what happens with the supply, you're going to have a high demand for it, and this will lead to a major drop in the price, and this will help consumers over the long run. If you have a highly elastic demand, a change in the supply leads to a lot more supply sold at the same cost, and this is going to be like farming. Know this point number 3, inelastic demand is best for consumers because the technological breakthroughs lead to a lower cost. So consumers want breakthroughs in inelastic product markets like food, electricity, things of that sort, because it's just going to cost them less in the long run. We're going to pass tax incidents. Really don't need to know much about that. Actually, we're just going to stop it there because the rest of this is all just elasticity in areas other than price, and it's the exact same concept. So we'll leave it there. Some high points for the chapter, right? Elasticity is about change over time. It's about the idea that that changes will be different across a graph, and that it's curved and not a straight line. Calculate the midpoint method for elasticity. Just sort of know how to use this formula under section 5.1. We're going to pass up polar elasticity. Know about this pricing chart. If I ask you if something, if gasoline is at a 0.35 elasticity, like it is on this chart, is that highly elastic or highly inelastic? And the answer, of course, would be inelastic, but try to get a feel for this chart and the kinds of goods that are inelastic versus elastic. I think that's about it in this chapter. All right, everybody have a wonderful day. I will try to get chapter 6 up, and I will be working on getting your exam ready to post up on Monday. Have a great day, stay happy and healthy, and keep working hard.